Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Futsal868 Corner Talks. And yes, we are guilty of watching Euros. And that's why, for today, we moved it from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. as you just witnessed a thriller between Portugal, defending Euro champions, and Belgium. So, congratulations to the Belgium fans. And yes, just to accommodate you guys, we moved it. And well, I am a football fan as well. We moved it from 4 p.m. to now 5 p.m. Futsal868 Corner Talks is an online meetup series where global sporting professionals share their experiences and perspectives on the fastest growing indoor sport in the world, futsal. In recent episodes, we have discussed other issues, including social, that reflects sports in our society. During this month of June, Futsal 868 hosted the four-part series entitled Sport and. The educational series looked at some of the sectors and professions that are part of the sporting landscape. Today, we reach to the end of this magnificent series. In episode 58, we close off with sport and mental health. Our guest today, joining us live, is Miss Alexandria Olton, who is a sport and exercise psychologist at her organization, Mindology. Good afternoon, Alexandria. Thank you very much for joining us once again. And if I may, before we start, let me add another title. Or better yet, you tell them as regards to your recent trip and experience with the men's national futsal team. So, good evening, Alexandra.
Good afternoon, Jeffrey, and thank you so much for inviting me on. Always a pleasure to be on the show with you. Yes, I have added the most recent experience of joining the TT men's futsal team on their quest at the CONCACAF Futsal Championships recently passed in April and May. We went to Costa Rica and Guatemala, and I accompanied them as in a dual role, if it were, as their sports psychologist and safety officer. So, and it was a true pleasure, really, to represent Trinidad and Tobago and support a national sporting team, and particularly futsal, which I have a special place in my heart for, of course. So
I appreciate that. So let's go straight into that. How was the experience for you, and whether it be from your profession as a sport exercise psychologist to your just added title? Give us your experience as detailed as possible.
Sure. So it was an incredibly unique experience, as you can imagine, because we're not just a team sort of traveling on to a competition, as it were, in previous times, but we are also adding the element of a global pandemic and trying to participate in sport from a global pandemic perspective, without spectators, with consistent PCR testing, with constant sanitization of equipment and the athletes and their uniforms. Everything was completely different, and it was an eye-opening experience. And I have actually produced an article about it in my fortnightly column that I conduct in the Trinidad and Tobago Newsday, talking about the psychological burden or strain that it can certainly place on athletes who are traveling during this time and trying to compete during this time. From the very simple things of, because of the border closure in Trinidad and Tobago currently, and what has been for the last sort of year and some, it makes leaving Trinidad and Tobago far more complicated. So the journeys become longer, the layover times in airports become sort of longer, and also the flights themselves are very restrictive. The protocols that you have to adhere to going through airports, and the gates, and sanitization, washing your hands, temperature checks, producing your PCR test results. It's very mentally exhausting, the whole travel process right now. And of course, your own sort of individual anxiety kicks in, as the inherent risk that you as an individual are taking by getting onto an aircraft and, surrounding yourself with complete strangers. Then getting into the environment, entering this, biosecure bubble that the athletes had to sort of engage in, so that you can't see the countries that you visit. So, I went to Costa Rica and Guatemala with the team, but we didn't really get to see much of the country outside of this sort of inner walls of the hotels and the inner walls of the stadium and arena that we competed in. Which was in itself a very strange feeling, because you felt as if you were away, but you weren't sure where you were other than in a particular hotel or a particular arena. And then the sort of mental strain that it takes on the athletes, having to understand that they can't share, sort of congratulatory handshakes or hugs or trade, kits as they once would with their teammates and their opponents. It was a very difficult environment, and of course, then adding that there are no spectators. So when you score or when you have a great play, normally you would hear a grand cheer coming from the stands, and it was silent if your own teammates and subs weren't making noises. And that in itself can play a role on an athlete who is competing sort of at an international level away from their home environment. And it sort of requires a lot of mental resilience, a lot of digging into one's sort of inner resilience and emotional agility, if it were, to be able to adapt to the environment consistently. And, you weren't allowed to sit and watch any of the other games that would take place before your game, or even stay and watch games after your particular match. The slots were associated, and time slots were specific, and you had to in and out at a certain exit and in a certain direction, and you can only walk through certain doorways and entryways, and all of that is very, very mentally taxing. And then adding the element of having to perform as an athlete playing a competitive sport. It was a truly incredible case study as a sports psychologist, so to be a part of that environment with the team.
That is an amazing introduction, to say the least. Do you think it was coincidental that you were given the opportunity to be a part of this journey? But not only in terms of what it is you just mentioned, but in terms of being able to keep the young men who represented Trinidad Tobago so well, and I will use the word sane. How were you able to do such, especially in your dual role? And I looked at your LinkedIn, and I saw the list of responsibilities that you had to undertake in such a dual role. How were you able to keep these young men, many of them for the first time representing the red, white, and black, and all of them for the first time representing the red, white, and black in such a unique situation?
That's an excellent question, Jeffrey, and oftentimes a fine balancing act, for sure. My dual roles as safety officer and sports psychologist meant that I had to keep them, to use your language, sane, and then to use mine, safe as well. So there was a physical and mental safety that I was trying to create for these national athletes of ours. I have to say that the culture of the team really aided in making the job a lot easier. The culture that futsal bred in preparing these guys, the quality and caliber of the coaches and technical staff, and the environment that they were coached and trained in leading up to this kind of great big step into a competition in COVID times, certainly aided in making it a little bit easier. It was also some of them the very first time that they ever interacted with a sport and exercise psychologist. So it's of course then trying to help them buy into the process of the mental preparation and its value as well. But I think as we got onto the actual trip itself and we started sort of enduring all these things, they came to realize the value of their mental strength or their mental well-being throughout the process. And the safety officer side of things was always going to be challenging, because of course everything is a risk as a safety officer outside of the safety of the confines of the hotel. As soon as you enter the bus, I start thinking, what are the inherent risks? Where are we going? Ensuring everything has been sanitized leading up to it. I have to say the competition was very well organized, and so the sanitization protocols and the time frames of which we were allowed to enter and leave the arena was very much adhered to and very well adhered to. And there were massive sort of body scanner style sanitizers that we would enter and exit every time, and face recognition temperatures and so the whole protocol on that front was excellent. And our preparation, our pre-tournament camp in Costa Rica, we were very well taken care of by the Costa Rican Football Federation. They treated us like absolute royalty, and it was a pleasure to sort of interact with that staff and talk to them. And they were very kind. And I remember having a conversation, and one of the members of the federation spoke to me, and she said, in these times, if we can't help each other out, then what is the value of sharing this network and this sport family that we have? And I couldn't agree more. And it was lovely to see that it's not just echoed around Trinidad, but also around the region, and globally. We are a sporting family, and we have to stick together. With respect to the sports psychology side of things, and helping the men through the national men's futsal men's team through this process, it required a lot of creativity, a lot of preparation beforehand on my part, to include a lot of activity and fun to help give them that sense of relaxation, and because that sort of element of physical safety can cause a buildup of anxiety, and you kind of carry it around, and you go to your room and you think you're de-stressing or you're unwinding, but you're just so tired because you're both on alert as an athlete, as an individual as well, sort of looking out for what are inherent risks and so on. But we spent a lot of time in group discussion, sharing as a team, and the team created that dynamic amongst themselves and committed to what they were there for, and it demonstrated itself in their very playing. They had fantastic game against Guatemala, and it was evident that they were banded together, sort of working together, and created that team culture. And so that was the most important part, for me at least, to have that for them.
We'll definitely speak to the first game against Dominican Republic and Guatemala in our next segment, as regards to team performance and your role as a sport and exercise psychologist in moving the guys from rebounding from a defeat,
yeah,
to a great performance once again. What lessons can be learned from this exercise that you undertook that can be transplanted to other national sporting organizations, national government bodies, who will be making that journey to other events during this pandemic period, notwithstanding the fact that we have the Olympics going to take place next month? So what would you tell officials and athletes to look out for?
I would certainly say that one of the key factors that became most evident is the need for that mental support, and the need for that mental pillar of preparation in the pillars of the technical staff. And that's not me promoting my field. It's evident now more than ever, because it takes a level of resilience, and, as I mentioned before, emotional agility to be able to adapt to situations like that. An example of such is that we had to get tested. There was a testing schedule that was mandated of the team in order to compete at the championships, and it was almost every other day we had a PCR test. And it might seem like a simple sort of exercise. You just go, take the nasal swab and leave. But the whole build-up and energy, some of it was very unpleasant. It's not a great sort of test experience. And the physical exertion of one's whole sort of emotional state to sit, take the test, and then you do, even though you haven't been exposed to any major risk or anything of the sort, you do wonder, I can't breathe easy until I know what the test results are, and you sort of hold your breath waiting, is someone going to test positive? What do we do if this happens? And the length of the document of the contingency plan that we had in place between myself and the team doctor and the officials back home to ensure that we protect our athletes as best as possible. I mean, all of that in itself is just so exhausting for them. So one of the main things for any team wanting to leave Trinidad to compete at a national level, to represent at an international level, to represent as a national team, I would definitely assert the necessity of that mental support, and that of a sports psychologist if possible. I think as well, just understanding that everyone will experience it in a different way. So, we could leave before this whole pandemic thing. We'd leave as a team, everybody would get excited. Some might be traveling for the first time, and you can sort of placate those emotions, but they're all positive. But sometimes you might find that athletes are struggling a little bit more because of this pandemic and competing during this pandemic. And then there's also the concerns of family members back home and such, keeping in contact, because of course COVID isn't isolated to one country, it's everywhere. So certainly, having the athletes check in with their families back home and, is everything okay? And if something goes wrong, then how do you help them bounce back from something like that as well? So again, understanding and creating those lines of communication so that if you do decide as a team to leave Trinidad and compete abroad, that understand that there are certain elements that you may have to sort of deal with, and it requires great communication between the technical staff and the athletes and amongst the athletes, and creating that dynamic is really important. So
let's talk gameplay here. The very first game was against Dominican Republic, a team that many persons in the CONCACAF region never saw play. As a matter of fact, Futsal868 Corner Talks had Futsal and CONCACAF, the series for that month leading up to the championship. And all of our guests from across the CONCACAF region never saw Dominican Republic play. And here it is, we are playing them in their second game after the host, where they actually gave a good showing. Talk us through the mental state of the players as regards to moving from not knowing who your opponents are, seeing who your opponents are, and actually preparing mentally for your opponents on your very first game.
Mhm.
And because they would have had at least some preparedness as regards to actually touching the court and playing an actual game.
Yes.
Talk us through that mental state.
It's certainly a build-up. Of course, we would have had the games against Costa Rica as well in the sort of pre-tournament camp, which would have provided us with some exposure to what it would be like at that level. Now, keeping in mind that this team, really, they are a remarkable team because they came together no more than 3 months in advance of the tournament. All relatively experienced 11-a-side players, but never having really engaged in the sport of futsal, which is completely different to football. You cannot translate those football skills to that futsal court because it's more of a dance, a salsa, if it were. You're moving constantly. The ball work, the work rate is so much faster. You're sprinting a lot more, and it's in a lot closer quarters. So you have to be able to make those shorter, quicker, more precise passes than say if you had an entire outdoor football field, which you could sort of lob the ball down the pitch and somebody will run it down. In futsal, of course, as you would know, it doesn't work like that. And so having these guys acquire new skills, practice those skills, and then apply it to an international competition setting was a fairly impressive feat by any means for an experienced team, let alone an inexperienced team. And the games against Costa Rica, they learned a lot. And I think it was a continual learning and growing process for them. And I think that in the game against Guatemala, the guys realized or truly revealed their potential, and as such sort of felt that defeat against the Dominican Republic, because I think they really truly believe that they could have beaten them if we had translated or clicked everything into place the day before. But as you know, those things don't always fall as they should. And that game against Dominican Republic was it was a very difficult and challenging game, because of course the Dominican Republic had the game the night before, and they were coming back with a vengeance because they were holding on with the skin of their teeth, that sort of last effort to qualify. And they really fought for it, and they came out and they fought for it. And I think to an extent it took the guys by surprise a little bit. And so the mental preparation leading up to that game was sort of identifying what we created what we called a performance readiness plan for your mental. So you identify various aspects such as your focus or your resilience, or when things go well or when things don't go well. And we talked through some of the obstacles that we might encounter and how we might apply our mental skills to overcome those obstacles. And I think the guys really, still tried their absolute best against that game against the DR. But, they were edged with the fact that, they didn't have that desperate need to beat somebody. And that in itself is a real mental motivation that can push a team to excel. Coming up to the game against Guatemala, we certainly revised sort of the team dynamic to an extent, and talking about some of the things that we were fearful or hesitant about, and speaking about what happened in that game against the DR and why those things happen. And in that team discussion, we discovered a lot together. And in that shared experience, we were able to come back with that fight against Guatemala. And I think that's really when we saw the true potential of the team. And unfortunately, it was just one game too late. But, that's really how it sort of progressed.
I truly respect and admire the honesty of the conversation that you mentioned here, because sitting in the leadership position after the defeat, I mean, the organization Futsal868 did our utmost best to be able to try out to send positive vibes and energies in many different forms and fashions. And we have to say thank you very much to the influencers who partnered with us in doing such. But as always, we are a culture of people that do not understand the back end of what is and what is happening at that moment, understanding that the ball is round and anything can happen when it comes to sport. More so, we are a society that is really and truly fixated on result and result now, not understanding that there's a developmental process which goes with it. And seeing the guys literally rebound, noting that there were many persons in the national quarters who basically said that Guatemala is going to disseminate Trinidad and Tobago.
Yes,
and the guys rebound in a very emphatic manner was remarkable. I had child labor pains. I could not watch any of the games. I got up 4:30 every morning and looked at social media, and I got the results. And then I went and do my daily prayer, and it was a lot for me mentally. So we'll have conversations as regards to that. But what would you say to Trinidad and Tobago, persons not understanding the mental side of the game? I mean, you did a great job for the last 20 minutes, expressing, but speak to the people of Trinidad and Tobago from that mental side of what it entails for these young men who represented us in terms of the red, white, and black.
Yeah. You're absolutely right when you say that we had both a lot of support and love, but also a lot of sort of discrediting and shaming and bashing. Even after the Costa Rican games, where the score lines were sort of seemingly big, but if anyone who watches futsal would understand that it's a high scoring game, so it's not like outdoor football where 7 goals is a lot. Futsal, it's constant scoring and so on. And after those Costa Rican games, which were friendlies, I think there was also, a lot of sort of disheartening comments and lack of support and non-belief in our ability to actually do anything in this CONCACAF tournament that we were about to embark on. And I think what we often miss in sport is that the outcome of winning is a byproduct of the development that we put into our athletes. Winning is not something that we can generate and create. You can create winners for a short-term outcome if you have a pool of extremely talented athletes who've been, very alert, and all of a sudden you can put them together and they win one game and that's it. But to truly replicate successes and have sustainable, successful athletes, and how we define successful athletes again is also important. But we have to engage in that level of developmental work. And I'm not talking from adult athletes' perspective. I'm talking from the very grassroots. The true sort of talent pool that you need to start putting your efforts into for the holistic development is that of your young athletes. And it does not mean technical specialization in any one sport. What I'm referring to is developing their social skills, their cognitive abilities, their reasoning, their decision making. It's not about being able to dribble at the age of 6. It's about the ability to recognize when there's a space and how I might play into the space. It might be they're holding a rugby ball, or they're playing with a football and they play cricket at the same time. That also, the exposure to multi-sport is incredibly important, because specialization too early doesn't actually, according to research, give competitive advantage as the athletes progress. And if anything, it oftentimes leads to athlete burnout and lack of commitment to the sport as they progress and get older. So we really need to focus in as, coaches, especially within all sports, to focus on our young athletes and the development of our young athletes' skills as individuals before they become athletes in a particular sport. And with that change and that culture change from the coaching level, I think then we would begin to see a culture change with the spectators of any sport here locally as well. And, it's only natural. Competitive sport is designed for winning and losing, right? That's how it works. You have winners, you have losers. The Olympic Games, the Pan Am Championships of any kind, World Cups and so on, you always have victors, and then you have the teams that are sent home. Look at the Euros, for example. Every time there's a game, one of my friends on social media posts a plane of the team that he wants to send home, their national airline. He says, okay, they're going home today and whatnot. So you always identify a victor. You always identify the winner. But that culture change needs to be supplemented, or that culture change should supplement the development culture that we want to breed in our local athletes. And it's about striving for excellence and well-being and sense of fulfillment before we strive for winning. And that can be a difficult transition, especially for coaches of younger athletes who want to see that winning outcome immediately. We have the smaller, we have leagues at the younger ages, and we want to see our team win. But it's also about teaching the athletes how to lose, how to bounce back from losing. So, for example, with our futsal team, how to return after that DR game to play Guatemala. It's about that, emotional intelligence is what you need to develop in your athletes. We can't have athletes who just listen to instructions. We have to have thinkers on the field. Otherwise, we're never going to see that sustainable sport and that sustainable success developed.
You lead us quite well into a break, because when we come back, we're going to speak community and mental health, as well as COVID-19 and mental health in sport. So you're watching Futsal 868 Corner Talks, Sport and In this case, sport and mental health, with Alexandria Olton. We'll be right back.
Thank you.
So, Alexandra, walk us through what that was.
I just have to say before I tell you what that was that I'm so happy you didn't get my my video of my initiation into the team. Oh dear. That was our talent show for anyone who was it was their first national tour, and they had to select a song of their choice and sing for the rest of the team. And they were the judges of whether the song was a good choice and whether it was sufficient enough vocals, or they had to continue. And of course, the bibs were the tomatoes, if it were, and they hooked to pull you off.
Brilliant. So that's one of the team building exercises that you would have spoken to in our first segment. Yes. That really helped to be able to relax the guys in what is the new normal in sport. At least let's hope that is temporarily, because we really hope that things go back to what we knew it before the COVID-19 pandemic. As we speak about COVID-19 pandemic, we are now in a situation where young persons, primary school, preschool, straight up to tertiary level, have not been to school for over a year. With that being said, they have not played. And I'm using the word play not just in the competitive sense of the word, but more so in the recreational sense, the socialization that sport brings, the building of character, and all that sport and development, sport for development, the positive elements that it speaks to. What, from your observation as a sport and exercise psychologist, what have the COVID-19 pandemic done for our students?
That is certainly a challenging question, Jeffrey, and one that unfortunately we don't have the long-term outcome effects for quite yet, because we didn't see this as mental health practitioners as something that was coming to our global society. So we have never studied something like this before. So to provide the long-term outcome effects, I couldn't speak to those, but in the short term, what we found is that it's placing our young people, our children, the adolescents and so on, under, even the adults I can speak to for, it's placing us all under this great mental strain. We now have, burnout or COVID fatigue, pandemic fatigue, as it's aptly called, where we're simply becoming sort of disenchanted, if it were, with this whole idea of this global pandemic and this global strife that we are all enduring. to the point where, you know, the lack of physical activity will certainly take its toll on our young people and our children's physical and mental well-being. Because of course, as a part of child development and you know, into adolescence, a major part of that is social interaction, and not just with strangers and so, but social interaction with their other family members. For babies, it's something like teaching them the recognition of different sorts of faces. You know, when a baby is born and it begins to identify its environments around them, they look at their parents' faces and they recognize their parents' faces, and that's why you see some babies sort of, you know, not cry when they see their parents, and they have an expression of positivity, if it were. And then when there are similar faces around them, such as their grandparents, and so they also recognize these faces. But with the lack of exposure to different people, because of course there's a physical safety risk, you know, is it going to affect children's development growing into, you know, toddlers and childhood and adolescence? Similarly, there was a lot of rates of occurrence of mental ill health in adolescence before this pandemic. So it will only, I am sure, the numbers might show an increase, unfortunately, which, you know, is going to be an incredible burden for us as mental health practitioners to try and protect our young people, because they are now confined to their home spaces. They are forced onto online school, which most are not designed for. Most people are not designed to learn online. It is a very niche platform in which it takes a certain type of learner to adapt to. A lot of people, I know I'm a very tactile learner, so I need that physical interaction, see a teacher writing on their board, taking notes and so on. And it's very difficult for anyone to concentrate on screen time for any enduring period of time. You know, you have that physical exhaustion, mental exhaustion, and then ultimately it's leading to burnout. And certainly it's going to take its toll, and the lack of sport and exercise, you know, something as simple as being able to go and walk around the savannah. Unfortunately, it's gotten to the extreme cases of us being in a state of emergency with a curfew. And so we are not allowed to go outside and exercise as we once were. And that lack of interaction with green space, outdoor space, which usually reduces levels of anxiety and depression, will only then increase those rates of occurrence. And so it's not going to be a healthy population mentally that we are dealing with coming out of this situation. And it is something that we have to prepare for as practitioners, that we are already dealing with. And indeed, I know a number of practitioners who are already to the point of burnout because they can't help enough people. There is not enough help to give to everyone. And it is certainly going to, I think, shock a lot more people than anything else.
Community coaches, community programs are sometimes home away from home. They are father figures, mother figures, they are guardians, they are friends, they are psychologists. What would you tell these community figures, sport practitioners, as regards to some of the tricks of the trade to speak to and to help their charges who will be coming to them when our Prime Minister says it's time to let them loose?
I think for the first and foremost is to allow that sense of enjoyment again, because these kids are going to come out and play sport as if they've never played sport before, and it's going to be sensory overload, if it were. And so allowing that freedom to let them, don't go right back into that rigid, structured, you know, we're preparing for competition kind of mode. Give them that freedom, you know, not for any length of time, even if it's just a couple of days of training and so on, so that they can return, interact with their friends, get back into, you know, conversations in person with their teammates, and develop that team rapport once again. Even in individual sports that, you know, you train with and amongst others that you would want to interact with and sort of reintroduce yourself to. And I think that's important. For sport league and community sort of figureheads, if it were, I think it's important to stay in touch with your athletes while we aren't at play. to remind them that you're there. I know a lot of coaches are having a lot of difficulty in athlete retention because, of course, with no sport, they're losing interest. And as such, they're just leaving the club, or, for some, it may be a financial difficulty and they cannot afford the extra for the hobby that isn't taking place. But still keep in touch, touch base with your athletes, keep them in the group chat, even if they decide to leave the club for whatever reason it might be. Of course, if it's not of their own accord and they just no longer want to play. But that develop that sense of community. I know it can be challenging sometimes with many athletes not having access to internet or laptops regularly or data on their phones and so. But check in, even if it's that you reach out to their parents and make sure they're doing okay and the family dynamic. It is indeed a challenge. You're right. Many of our athletes have very challenging home environments, and sport is their escape. It's a form of escapism for a lot of our young and grassroots athletes. And indeed, losing that will create a sense of chaos for them in their lives. And so it's important to just create that line of communication and let them know that you're still there and that we are coming back out to sport, and we will return to some sort of in-person interaction, and their presence is wanted, and remind them that they're there.
We have a question from one of our guests, or I should say viewers, Mr. Damien Daniel, who asks, any advice for older coaches who grew up outside to teach the 5 and 6-year-olds who were inside from as young as 3 to 4? A very in-depth question. I mean, some of the things you would have spoken to, but I think it might be a little bit deeper than that.
Yes, absolutely. So it's basically the generation of insiders, if it were, who are now growing up in this pandemic. I think that the key to it, at least from a psychological perspective, I can't speak from a physiological perspective with any great depth of knowledge, but I would say that it's important to still interact in that form of play. Create time in the daily schedule for sensory play, for physical activity, even if it's inside and it's simple, sort of back and forth, or moving a ball around. If you have some space for an outside, for a yard or a back garden and whatnot, create that physical movement for that child, or if they have siblings, even better for the children, and get that social interaction going. Even if you have to sort of manufacture it, but you create that time for space for play. Because we can quite often get caught up in the virtual demand, and this is the schedule. We get up, we go to online work, we finish, and then we just want to de-stress, and then we have to get to our chores and cook and clean and whatever else, and it can get lost in translation, or we can sort of overlook it and its value. But I think if one piece of advice is create that time slot for play and free play.
There's a huge comment from Mr. Richard Goddard that he says, good afternoon. The current situation for the children of Trinidad Tobago due to the pandemic measures has many of them feeling despondent about sport, especially when they see children from other countries playing and growing and improving. Just to make a note here, some people might say, what is Mr. Goddard speaking about? But it is true, because social media, for which these children have in the palm of their hands, is going to teach them and educate them. So I continue. What are some of the major issues you have heard and seen in the children you have worked with? And what suggestions do you have to keep their spirits up when it is unclear how soon they can return to play and be with their friends? Great question to you, Richard Goddard, as well as to you, Damien Daniel. Thank you very much for the questions. And I know they have you on your toes as well, Alex.
No, that's all right.
It's really putting on questions. And
absolutely.
The two individuals who have spoken here, Mr. Richard Goddard is very much he's very much a part of sport in Tobago, being a development officer at the Tobago House of Assembly Division of Sport and Youth Affairs. And Mr. Damien Daniel is a community coach, having worked with the sport company of Trinidad and Tobago before. So these two gentlemen are practitioners in sport at some of the highest levels. So Tell us, give us your insight to that question from Mr. Goddard.
Sure. A very detailed and in-depth question indeed, and one that can be challenging. Some of the things that I have seen in my own athletes, my younger athletes that I interact with, is not so much in comparison to others, because I think there is a level of awareness, perhaps not with the younger children, but the younger children then won't be engaged on social media as much, whereas the older ones who are on social media also understand the sort of risk factors that come with COVID-19 and the pandemic and why we're inside. It's not so much a comparison of how come they get to do it when we don't, but more so of an inner frustration of, I just really want to go outside, or I just really want to play with my friends. I just want to see my friends, and that sort of inner frustration and angst. And one of the ways that we can try to placate it, unfortunately, it's not something that we can eliminate entirely, because if you look at it, we as adults are struggling. I know I've certainly had my days where I've just been absolutely frustrated, and to the point where I'm just becoming unproductive, and I'm just like, okay, I need to take a minute or an hour and just relax and sort of get myself together again before I can, really try to be a productive member of society. And if you understand what it does to us as rational thinking, sort of able to control our emotions adults, imagine what it's doing to teenagers and the younger ones, the children in our communities. And it's very difficult for them. And I think what's most important is a couple of factors. Because they're confined to online schooling, which is, of course, very mentally demanding and a lot of screen time. When they come off of those devices, ensure that their downtime is not also on a device. Ensure that their downtime is not then going on to social media, or, for the yearning of their friends, they go right onto WhatsApp and they start talking. And that extra or additional screen time can really then add that additional mental fatigue and mental exhaustion. And that affects our concentration, on our ability to sleep effectively, our ability to sort of really disengage. And I think, as I mentioned with the question before, creating that slot of time, allocated time for, if it's an older athlete, exercise, or engaging in some kind of physical activity, or even running small little drills at home if you have a little bit of space to do it, or creating that little space. Something as simple as mobility and flexibility work, stretching, yoga, if that's something that calls to you, or Pilates, core workouts. I know a lot of athletes require that high intensity blood pumping kind of exercise, but it's also about helping them understand and guiding them to understand what's going on, and trying to get them to understand that it's not that we have to fixate on what we've lost, but we have to try and put things into context. What am I able to do now? What's within my control now that I can do, and what are the activities that I can engage in as a result? If I'm confined to my home, what are the things within my control? Well, how I eat and what I eat, and this for young children is very important, because our gut sort of really affects our mood, because we have serotonin receptors in our gut. So as we eat high sugars, processed sugars, and high fat foods, we find that our gut responds with an increase in mood for a short period of time, and then we plummet in mood, and our mood will drop. So that can affect a young person. So their diet, their regular daily diet, ensure that they have a lot of fruit, a lot of vegetables. And I'm not talking about, the expensive things and whatnot. Find fruits that are in season, vegetables that are available and readily, and make use of what's available on the local market. We in Trinidad and Tobago have a plethora of fruits and vegetables at our disposal. So try and, encourage the kids to eat stuff like that, and really help them find a balanced diet. Ensure that they're sleeping. A lot of young people go into bed, but they stay awake till 1 o'clock in the morning, and then they get up for like 5, 6 o'clock for school. And so you're only looking at 4 to 5 hours of sleep, when realistically them as adolescents need, 8 to 16 hours sleep, because that's the time they become, the hibernating bears, if it were. So ensuring that they're sleeping, and then creating that activity time. If you as parents or guardians of these young people find difficulty in creating that space, make it a family activity. It doesn't have to be anything, major or extreme. Even a little dance party in the living room. Put on some nice soca music, some reggae, some old tunes. Teach the kids about old time music and stuff. And create an environment of fun, because that is what we're missing. That's what sport created for us, was that level of fun. Yes, we have that competitiveness with it, but for the children and the adolescents, it's just that sense of missing fun and freedom. So try and mimic various things, even getting them to cook in the kitchen or paint, modeling clay, and you have an arts and craft day. I know it sounds difficult to create when parents and guardians and of young people they have work, they have school teacher roles, they have parent roles, and then they have now arts and craft teacher roles. But we're taking on a lot. But it's some of the ways that we might create an environment of play for these kids.
So we're in the final leg of our session, and we're just going to take one more question from our viewers. They're coming fast and furious. Mr. Karen Mother says, given the unfair stigma attached to therapy and psychologists in our culture, how challenging has it been getting our athletes to open up and remove the mental blocks in understanding your practice? That is a brilliant question.
Very much.
And I want to add to that question as well.
Sure.
How are we going to given the fact that we are going to have a lot of mental issues, how are we going to get out the parents, guardians, and coaches, community level and national level, elite level, recreational, to be able to say, let's take you to a specialist. Let's take you to somebody who knows what they're saying. So I will leave the question up, and you could be able to add value to my question as well.
Sure, Jeffrey, and thank you to Karen as well for his question. You're right, you're absolutely right. There is very much a stigma attached, not just to sports psychology, but mental health and mental ill health on the whole in Trinidad. And it has certainly been a challenge from that standpoint, but one of the key things for me as an individual, at least with my own practice, is that I lead with education. So I engage with coaches in trying to create a rapport for them to understand what I do and how it will help them and their athletes. I always say, I'm not a parent, I'm not a coach when I'm wearing my sports psychologist hat, and I'm not, an athlete. I am a supplemental or supporting pillar to the coaching and the athletic performance. And what I do is I assist coaches and athletes in making that environment most conducive to bolster performance. So I lead with education. I try to ensure that people know what I do and what it entails. And the performance psychology aspect of it is simply that I help athletes develop mental and cognitive and behavioral skills that ultimately lend to supporting and aiding in bolstering their performance using the basis of psychology. It may sound complex, but actually when we unpack it, it's fairly simple, a process that we go through with athletes. And what I would say is actually the hesitancy doesn't come from the athletes as much as it does from the coaches and parents sometimes. When the athletes are willing to engage, sometimes the hesitancy comes from the coaches themselves, because it's why are you seeing a sports like something is wrong with you? But that's another sort of nugget of education that I try to incorporate, is that athletes don't have to come to me when something is wrong. I can take an athlete who's having poor performances and help them better those performances, but I can also help an athlete who's having good performances make them great performances. And, it's the use of psychology, and that word is very scary to a lot of people, but mental health and mental well-being impacts all aspects of their lives. So it's not just that they're going to perform well as athletes, they're going to utilize the same skills and apply it across their lives. They're going to become better workers. They're going to become more effective in their relationships, their friendships, their family dynamics, because they're then able to manage themselves and what is required of them and the tasks that are demanded of them, and they know how to perform well at them. So, I lead with, I would say, the education side of things when it comes to trying to destigmatize mental health. And sorry, Jeffrey, I just don't remember the latter half of that question.
Not a problem. I will pull it up again.
And getting athletes to open up and remove the mental blocks. So that's the first stage, create that dynamic with the coaches, engage with the coaches. And then when it comes to the athletes themselves, I use approaches that are very athlete-centered or what we call person-centered therapy. So ultimately, I am not the expert in the room, but the athlete is the expert in the room, and I simply guide them to the answers and the solutions that they need to help overcome any challenges that they are having or bettering their performance in some way, shape, or form. And so I rely heavily on that relationship that I develop with athletes. So I always try to find some kind of common ground. I'm not able to always put myself in everybody else's shoes and say I've shared the experience. That would simply be boring. Us in Trinidad and Tobago, we have such a diverse population, religious backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, and then socioeconomic backgrounds can also act as a barrier sometimes as a practitioner. And so you have to be able to create that relationship, and that is where my practice, I focus heavily on developing that, athlete practitioner relationship and developing that trust and ensuring that I sustain that trust by staying, above board, keeping the athlete assured that their confidentiality is key to me, that there is ethics in my practice, and then, showing the proof in the pudding. So it's not a bunch of airy-fairy theories that I sort of just pluck off of blogs and so on. It's something I've studied for a number of years in order to be able to practice. And so it is really about telling the athlete that and showing the athlete that I've done my homework. I'm doing, the sport-specific knowledge as well, being able to, I learn the athlete's language, whatever sport they play, I try to learn the language they use in that sport so that we can speak on a common level and a similar level. And they gain, a sense of trust and safety with you when they see that you take vested interest in their, sport in particular. So it's a combination of tools and tricks that are required to sort of convince someone to come to sports psychologists.
And I'm totally agreement with that, because just in the first segment, for you to break down futsal in such a great manner, clearly you took time to understand what the guys went through. And I was very much impressed with, even before you became the sports psychologist attached to the team, you came down at these sessions and you observed.
Mm-hmm.
You observed. You sat down as a spectator and then became a fan of the sport before it is you dealt with the guys. And I certainly can attest to that part of your practice. And I really must say thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
And our viewers, we're going to take a quick break and come back to Alex's closing remarks. You're watching Sport and Mental Health. We'll be right back. As always, we keep moving with Lucozade, and stay tuned to our Instagram challenge. It's called the Summer Move, Lucozade Summer Move Instagram challenge, which will be starting on the 1st of July. So stay tuned to that. Alex, give us your closing remarks, and thank you very much for being a part of Sport and the series.
Thank you so much for having me, and it was a true pleasure to always speak on Corner Talks and engage with you, Jeffrey. So thank you so much. For my closing remarks, I'd simply like to say that we are all enduring this together. Our athletes are struggling, our coaches, our parents, we're all in this shared community, and it's important to be reminded of that, and that there are people to support you and that are here for you. And I am certainly happy to be one of those people to lend support to our athletes and coaches who want to reach out. And be kind to yourselves, put everything into context, and the expectations of of ourselves, ensure that we are being kind and realistic with our expectations, and so we can, hold steady the mental health and mental well-being as a collective.
Definitely, and let's make sure that I have Mr. Mark Lewis, who is saying, after Alex, I am still having flashbacks still at the home of football.
Oh no.
Thank you very much. Mark, I think you may have to have some psychology. Mark may need to with some psychological help as
Certainly.
regards to that going on right there. But Alex, please do give us your contact details and how persons can find you as regards to Instagram, to be able to get more to you when it comes to sport and exercise psychology. Please give us your details.
Sure. So on social media, you can find me on Instagram at mindologytt. I also have a website, mindologytt.com. You can simply look up Alexandria Olton, and you might come across the website, and my telephone contact, my email address are all available on those platforms, or at Alexandria Olton on Twitter as well. So feel free to reach out on any one of those channels, and I will certainly respond.
Thank you very much, Alex. And it's not going to be the last time again, because this topic of sport and mental health is something we will always revisit, because it's very much important and it's part of who we are at Futsal 868 and in the continuous efforts to educate our stakeholders on sport. And if you notice for yourself how it has transcended from the very first time to now, the amount of questions and I must say some very much hard questions.
Yeah, very difficult questions today, but I'm always open.
And it's great. But thank you very much, Alex. Have a great one. Be safe, and we definitely will be in touch. To you and your family, have a blessed week ahead.
And
so
to you.
Until next time.
Bye-bye,
Alex. Bye. So that was Alexander Olton, sport and exercise psychologist at Mindology, who went with the guys at the recently concluded CONCACAF Men's Futsal Championship. Dual role, I must say, and we want to say thank you very much to her for what she has done in service to our country. As we end this great, mind-blowing series, sport, and I want to say thanks to God first and foremost for giving us this opportunity to really and truly come up and create such wonderful discourse, and to all of our guests who made themselves available every single Sunday evening, as well as to you, the viewers. Thank you. We say thank you. Please continue to spread the word, and as always, follow us, like us on social media, and share with your friends. You want to know what's next on Futsal 868? Don't worry, we have a lot coming. Next month is the Olympics. What are we going to discuss? Take a look. Controversial, mind-blowing, educational. That's how we describe July at Futsal 868 Corner Talks. On behalf of the Futsal Association of Trinidad and Tobago, we wish you all a great week ahead, and see you all next week as we start that French word that I can't pronounce, but it means the Olympics. Have a great one, and see you all next week. Bye.